Just run it up here a bit. I don't know what happened there. This is a recording with Ed Finch, 3579 Fairway Forest Drive, Palm Harbor, Florida. Phone 813-785-2380 at his home, Thursday, February the 16th, 1989, with Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center. Tape 1 of 2 tapes. Kind of take us through your experience of Oldsmobile when you hired in. What department did you hire in with?
Okay. First of all, I'm Ed Finch, or Edmund Finch, Edmund L. And we're currently living in Palm Harbor, Florida. Our address is 3579 Fairway Forest Drive. And if anyone wants to call us, we're on area code 813-785-2380. We had always lived in Lansing. I grew up in Lansing, and Joan and I were married in Lansing. I went to Sexton, and she went to East Lansing High School. And shortly after that, when I got out of college, we moved to Bay City. And when my parents died, it became necessary for us to move back to Lansing. And so we moved back to Lansing in February of 1953. And one of the first things I did with about a 4 or 5 month old baby was to get scratching looking for a job. And Oldsmobile, of course, at that time, and I guess it still is, was the largest employer in the area. And so I went down to Oldsmobile, and I saw a man named Matt Campbell, whom a lot of people know, in salary personnel, and I put in my application. Matt, of course, told me that there were no openings at that time and suggested that I go downstairs because they were hiring for the factory. And so, needing a job badly, I went downstairs, and that was on a Monday.
Downstairs, what building?
Downstairs,
was
that was over in building, that was in building 60.
the old administration?
I'm sorry, I said downstairs, I'm thinking of building 62, but the old administration building. They sent me down to the hourly employment office.
Now, where was that located?
That was located on what now is the corner of Townsend and Elm Street. It was Townsend and Elm Street then, but the employment office was in the far south end of the old administration building, building 60. And that's where I first applied.
What type of job were you applying
I
for?
was looking for anything. I was looking for any kind of a job that would help me put some bread on the table for my wife and baby.
You hadn't really, on your salaried application, you hadn't applied for any specific
I did not apply
job.
for any specific thing. I graduated from Michigan State in speech and journalism, and so I really was looking for any type of job, primarily, I suppose, clerical, to get in, on the ground floor in the salaried area. Matt had nothing open, though, and he suggested I apply on hourly, and golly, I applied on Monday, and on Thursday I started to work in the factory over at Plant 3, which is the jet plant.
What were you doing?
Well, I was soon to become an experienced lathe operator. Now, at the time, I didn't know a lathe from a shovel, but I went to work for a foreman named Al Bopp. A lot of people know Al. And I learned to run a lathe making jet engine discs. That was in the old, I think they call it the J-65 jet engine program. That was during the build-up for the Korean War. The Korean War. And Oldsmobile had a contract, I believe it was through Buick, to build jet engines, or jet engine components. Bob Scott worked over there at the time. Bob Scott was a superintendent down on the other end of the plant. Buell Sadler was my superintendent. And I kept bugging Matt Campbell for a job, and I went to see Matt every Thursday afternoon. I'd hurry home from work and get my clothes changed and get back down to the salary personnel office. Well, during that period of time, the salary personnel department, as well as the hourly personnel department, moved from building 60 over to what is now building 62, the ground floor of building 62. And they had it would be the east end, the first and second floors of building 62. They built the plant hospital in there, and the hourly employment office was right next to the plant hospital. Salary personnel office was upstairs. And Matt had an office up there. And I kept bugging Matt every Thursday afternoon for a job. Do you have anything yet? After we'd been there, I don't know, about a month and a half, 2 months, without any prospects, I said to Matt one day, I'll never forget this, I'm not sure that he ever will. I said to Matt one day, I said, Matt, I have never belonged to a union, in my life. And I don't intend to belong to a union for the privilege of working at Oldsmobile. And he said, well, now, you can't be putting out ultimatums. I said, no, there's no ultimatum or anything. I just wanted to let you know where I am. I won't be around here very long because I'm going to have to find a job. Well, lo and behold, he must have figured that maybe somebody like me ought to fit in labor relations because within a few days, he set up an interview with me with a fellow named Harold McFarland, who at the time was the director of labor relations. And I got a job. I got a job as a clerk. I started in as a senior clerk over at Plant 3, where I had been working out in the factory. I ended up going in to work with Harold Cutler. Harold Cutler was the labor relations representative.
What time was that?
That was probably in late March of 1953. And Harold had been sent over to Plant 3 to set up and establish a labor relations office. And one of my first jobs was to go to the main employment office in Building 62 and pull out all of the employment folders and the employment files and the records for all of the hourly people working at the jet plant.
Now, was that a new department then, apparently?
Yes.
At Plant 3, Labor Relations?
Yep. Harold Cutler set up the new labor relations office, and he was the labor relations representative, and I was his clerk.
And prior to that, all of the plant's labor relations had been handled at the main office?
All of it
plant.
except for the forge plant. The forge plant had always been separate.
They had their own labor relations.
They had their own labor relations. Les Davidson used to have that office. And the forge plant, of course, you probably know from digging into history, used to be the old, I think they call it the Rheinbold plant. Oldsmobile bought a Rheinbold back in the 40s, I think it was. And Les Davidson was the labor relations representative over there.
Okay.
So Harold Cutler then became the labor relations man at Plant 3, and I was his clerk. And shortly after that, I can't give you the exact time, but sometime during late 1953, Harold Cutler transferred back to the main plant in labor relations, and Fred Barrett replaced him over at the jet plant. One thing I remember about working as a clerk over there was that we had the volume of work that was too great for one person to handle, and yet the budget, I guess that isn't much different then than it is now. The budget wouldn't justify an additional head, and so we used tech students. And I had a series of tech students go through that office, and about the only one we ever asked back, I think we asked for him back either 2 or 3 times, was Doug Tracy. And Doug Tracy's gone on to achieve a certain element of success in Oldsmobile and in General Motors now. But Doug was a heck of a tech student then, and he showed his ability very early. Do you want me to keep on with what happened to me from there?
Certainly do.
Along about, I guess it would be December of 1954, or maybe January of 1955, Bessie McCree, who was an institution at Oldsmobile, was going to retire. Bessie McCree was the head of the Sickness and Accident Claims Office. She was located over in Building 62, and Bessie McCree had been at Oldsmobile for 40-some years at the time, and she was one of the longest-serving women at the time of her retirement that Oldsmobile had. And I replaced Bessie McCree in the Sickness and Accident Insurance Office. That would be called Personnel Services. I worked there for, I guess about 5 years. And in July of 1960, Harold Cutler, who remembered me from being his clerk over at Plant 3, asked me down and interviewed me and told me that he had selected me to be a labor relations representative. And so in July of 1960, I became a labor relations representative working for Harold Cutler.
July 1960.
Mm-hmm. Bill Mahoney was the personnel director at the time. And anybody who ever knew Bill Mahoney knows who I'm talking about and what a great guy he was. I became a labor relations representative in July of 1960, which was just a year before the next agreement was up for negotiation in 1961. I worked with some of the people that really grew up with labor relations in Oldsmobile and in General Motors.
Who were they?
You see, well, the first agreement with the UAW in General Motors was in 1937, And back in 1937, Carol Cutler was there, Bill Mahoney was there, Fred Barrett was there, Gail Retzloff was there, a fellow named Ray Brown was there. Now these fellows were all still working actively in the labor relations activity when I joined the labor relations department. Bill Mahoney, as I said, was personnel director, but those are the people that grew up with the UAW and with the local union in Lansing.
Well, then, at that time, Ed, labor relations was sort of an adjunct to personnel. It wasn't a separate
No, that's correct. Labor relations worked under the personnel director.
department
Yes.
on its own, as
No.
it did come into being later.
Well, yes, it was a department on its own, but it was a department of the personnel staff.
I see.
Bill Mahoney, as I said, was the personnel director. Harold Cutler, before Harold Cutler was a fellow named Francis Anderson. F.I. Anderson was the director of labor relations, and he had replaced Harold McFarland, who initially interviewed me for a salary job back in '53. Harold Cutler became the director of labor relations, and F.I. Anderson became the director of personnel services. And so I worked in labor relations under Harold Cutler until I became supervisor of labor relations in 1964, I think it was. And in 1969, I became general supervisor in labor relations. Excuse me.
Do you, during that period of time, recall any special labor relations problems that stand out in your mind or situations?
Well, Oldsmobile was always, I think, very fortunate with their labor relations activities. I don't believe we ever had a strike or a walkout that was caused by local problems. The strikes that occurred at Oldsmobile were national in origin. In other words, they came out of Detroit. And I think probably one of the reasons for that was the good working relationship that Oldsmobile management, and here again Bill Mahoney and Harold McFarland and F.I. Anderson and Harold Cutler and fellows like that had with the local union representatives. They always, and subsequently, we always tried to deal fairly and honestly with the union. And I found in my experience that even though we had disagreements, that it never degenerated into any personal animosity either way between the union or between management.
Do you remember any names of union people that...
Oh gosh, yes.
Let's have a few.
There was John Haruska and Glenn Jones, Frank Willoughby. John Haruska was the international union representative stationed in Lansing.
That local 652?
Well, no, he was the international rep. He was the international representative for the UAW in Lansing. He had local 652 and he had local 650 with a Fisher Body local. He had at that time the Motor Wheel local. He had several smaller plants. The other names that I mentioned, Glenn Jones, Frank Willoughby, John Goodwin, those fellas were chairman of local 652, the main plant unit. And of course, over at the Forge plant, they had a separate UAW local over there.
Do you remember the number of that local?
At that time, I believe that was part of 652, and they, sometime in the early 60s, split off and formed their own local, and it became local 1618. Bob Walker was one of the mainstays of local 1618, and its predecessor, Bob Walker, had been at Oldsmobile for years and years and years and years, and he may still be there for all I know, although I doubt it. But they had the same kind of relationship at Plant 2 that they had at the main plant. The labor problems were, well, they were severe, and they were always problems that we managed to work our way out of, and I think probably it was because of the relationship we had with the union.
What kind of problems were, do you recall any specifically that you could resolve?
Primarily, no, I don't know that, you could get too specific on I always said to my wife that one of the things I enjoyed about my job was that every day was different. You never had the same problem twice, and there was a lot of them that we had, but most of them were what I'd call minor problems.
Did you have a problem with absenteeism?
Absenteeism was a problem then, and I'm sure it's probably a problem today.
Drugs?
You stop and think about absenteeism and the number of extra people that you have to carry on the payroll just to fill in for people who are absent, and it's astronomical. You can't imagine that if you were to run a 10% absentee rate with 15,000 people. How many extra people you're talking about? And each of those people are entitled to certain benefits, retirement benefits, insurance benefits, and it's just wasted money, really. Drugs, not at that time, not in the early 50s and 60s, although Oldsmobile was one of the first, in fact, I shouldn't say one of the first, Oldsmobile was the first division and one of the first industries in the United States to recognize a problem with alcohol. And consequently, Sam Donahue started an alcohol awareness or an alcohol, you can't say treatment, but an alcohol program at Oldsmobile. I would have to think that's probably back about 1963 or 64, after Sam Donahue became the Director of Labor Relations. And he started that program with a fellow named Roland Austin. Roland, I can't call him Roland, he's Roley. Roley Austin eventually went on to become the Director of the corporation's alcohol and drug abuse program. And so Oldsmobile was one of the first in that area, and it seems like it would be back in 1963, 1964. And they really just kind of flew by the seat of the pants. They were pioneers. They didn't have much of a roadmap to follow to how do you treat alcoholics. And at that time, of course, the reversion rate, or whatever you want to call it, of heavy drinkers was very, very high. I'm sure now that they've gotten refined the treatment and the recognition of alcoholics to a greater degree than they did then. But Oldsmobile is one of the pioneers in that area, and I think that's a feather in Oldsmobile's cap. Most of your industries now in the United States have an alcohol and drug awareness and a drug treatment program. But we were the first.
Do you know how our rate of recovery balances against the U.S. rate of recovery?
I don't now, Helen. I think at the time that we were, right up there, and I can't even pick the figure out of the air, but we were right up there as far as one of the things that they had to do. One of the things that you had to do with the alcoholics was finally to get rough with them. At that time, you could not convince an alcoholic that they had a problem until they were about to lose their job. And of course, under the discipline structure of negotiated agreements and dealing with the union and that kind of thing, you had to follow certain steps and certain procedures in order to build up a disciplinary thing to the point where we could actually threaten somebody with their job. I mean, they had to have been absent so many times, or they had to have had so many rule infractions before you could build them up to the necessary penalties where the next step's discharge. And so consequently, you would get these people when they're just about to put their foot on the banana peel and slide out the door, and then they would have to recognize that, well, maybe I do have a problem, and I'm either going to lose my job or I'm going to listen to these people talk, and I might as well listen to people talk because I don't want to lose the job. And that's kind of what got the alcoholic program going.
When those men were, primarily they were men, I assume.
Initially it was mostly men, probably because we didn't recognize that women had the same problem, maybe not in as great a number. But there were quite a few, as it developed, there were quite a few women who had problems with alcohol too.
Well, when that employee, shall we say, came back from his alcohol treatment, was he assigned the same job that he
Usually
had
in the
before?
same job or in the same area. In some cases, they ultimately were discharged, and in some cases they were able to get into a program and convince us that they were deserving of another chance. Some of them worked out, some of them didn't. I think more of them worked out than those that didn't.
But if they didn't work out, then was...
If they didn't work out, then they were gone. And you hate to think about it.
There was no second chance
they were-
because they'd already had a number of chances.
Well, there were a few second chances. Like I said, they were in fact discharged, some of them, and they were given a second chance in some occasion. But when they failed that, they were gone, and you hate to think of them on the scrap piles of history, but I guess that probably happened to a lot of them. But we saved quite a few people, and ultimately you save quite a bit of money for the company because these are trained, experienced people,
Mm-hmm.
and it costs money. I don't have a dollar figure on it, but it costs money to train employees in the way you do things and the way we do things, and what our heritage is and where we're going.
So now you're back at the main plant.
Now I'm back at the main plant.
Okay. Where do we go from there?
Well, in 1968, I went over to the forge plant to handle the labor relations over there. Roger Lee had been there for a couple of years, and they brought Roger back to the main plant, and I went to the forge plant. We were both at that time supervisors of labor relations, and so they wanted to give me some experience at the forge plant, because that was an area where you had the total responsibility for the labor relations activity, the skilled trades activity, the production people, negotiating your own union meetings, conducting your own local negotiations for agreements and that kind of thing. I was over there for 3 years. No, it was more than that. I was over there until 1971 or 72. And then I went back to the main plant for a short period of time, and was then made the director of personnel services in 1973, I think it was. 1973, I believe it was in like June or July of 1973. At that time, personnel services had the responsibility, as a director of personnel services, I had the responsibility for the hourly employment office, for the sickness and accident insurance benefits, the workers' compensation benefits, the supplemental unemployment benefit program, the hourly rate employee pension program, recreation activities, service awards, club activities. Now, club activities used to be quite big. We used to have parties for the quarter century club, and parties for the salaried employees, picnics and that kind of thing. So that's in 1973. I started then in personnel services, which really was kind of like coming back home to me, because I had started out some 15 years before, 17 years I guess before, in the sickness and accident insurance office when I replaced Bessie McCree, as I told you a little while ago.
You mentioned the service awards. And what type of service awards do we have for various years of service?
Well, at that time we had what was then what we now call, or what we called when I left anyway, the old type service awards versus the new type. The old type was the pins, the crest, the Oldsmobile crest on a jackknife, I think was 10 years, and the pair of cufflinks with the Oldsmobile crest was 15 years, and something else for 20 years, and then 25 years they had the quarter century ring, what they called the quarter century ring. And I'm very proud to have one of those. I was one of the probably the last 2 or 3 years. How am I saying this? I'm saying this wrong, but about 2 or 3 years after I got mine, the program was discontinued when the corporation instituted and kind of mandated the corporate service award program for all of the divisions to standardize the service awards. And their reasoning was good. The federal government had come in with some income tax regulations and rules that you were only permitted to give a gift to an employee that was valued at $25 or less or something like that. And anything over that amount, the employee was supposed to report it on income tax. And of course they weren't doing. Now these 25-year rings at that time were costing us considerably more than $25. So technically we were putting the employees in a bind by giving them an award that threw it into an income tax problem. And they weren't aware of it, and I guess probably a lot of us weren't either. But the corporation came in then with their program, which was a series of pins with various colored jewels in it. That was probably put in effect about a year or two before I retired. I retired in 1983 in March. Some divisions of the corporation gave clocks, some of them gave rings, some of them gave nothing. So really we were all over the map, just depending on which division you worked for, how you were recognized within General Motors. And it really wasn't fair to a General Motors employee out in Walla Walla not getting anything, and somebody at Oldsmobile getting a $150 ring or whatever. And so the corporation kind of pulled that all together and said, here's the new service award program, and boy, was there gnashing of teeth when that happened. these old quarter-century rings were very popular items.
I notice you have a diamond or two in
I've
yours.
got 3 in mine.
Three diamonds.
Yeah, as I hit 30 years, they put the 2 side diamonds in. It comes with 1 on top. And as you hit 30 years, they put 2 on, 1 on either side. If you hit 35 years, they put 2 of them down at the bottom, so that you could end up with 5 or 6 diamonds in it. This was one of the things that was adding to the cost of the service award program, too.
Very, very nice.
But they are nice, and I wear mine proudly. And every once in a while, you'll run into somebody, you'll recognize them as an Oldsmobile retiree, because you'll see that doggone ring across the restaurant, and you can say, hey, I should know that guy, you know. So
There's a little bond right there.
yes, there is.
There.
There is. And of course, there are a lot of Oldsmobile people down in this area. I haven't run into many of them, but I see by my list here that there are quite a few people that I knew, Carrie Fowler and Clayton Smith and some of those people over the years.
Well, Ed, now the recreation department that grew into such a large program, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the recreation program started out, initially, I think Gail Retzloff was working in the recreation programs. We had softball leagues, we had bowling leagues, we had golf leagues, and they used to run cribbage tournaments. Matt Campbell was always an avid participant in the cribbage tournaments. And it really got to a point where it just grew like Hogan's Goat. I mean, it was just a monstrous thing to do, computing the golf handicaps and the bowling averages and that kind of thing. And we always limped along with one person handling it. Gail Retzloff was doing it when I first went there, and then Fred Barrett took it over, and then finally Dale Bovee had it, and then Dale Bovee finally retired. Dale Bovee went to a suggestions program, and then he finally retired from suggestions. But our recreation program was a program that was very popular with both salaried and hourly employees. And one of the great things about the recreation program is it did get salaried and hourly people playing together. In other words, we formed a lot of close personal bonds and friendships there between, if you will, management and union, management and labor. That kind of broke down a lot of barriers. If they developed a bowling team that had salaried people and hourly people on it, and you're playing in that kind of a league, there's a bond of friendship, as well as, let's get together and do our job. So, of course, Lansing was always lucky in that area that we had a workforce that was made up of the children of farmers from around the mid-Michigan community, the kids of college professors, the kids of state workers, the kids of Oldsmobile workers. And so we had a diverse work group there that was just made for a darn good labor force. In fact, I suspect it's probably true now. Oldsmobile was always the envy of the people down in the corporation that I knew, that I ran into, because of the workforce that we had. It was always a very highly respected division.
Well, Ed, now the factory then subsidized the prices for...
Yes. Yep, we had an operating budget for the recreation program. We had an operating budget for our club activities, which I mentioned were the dinners and the banquets and that kind of thing. We had the division allocated, and I'd say very generously, to our recreation budget until we got into the dollar crunch like we eventually did. And then, of course, we got cut in all areas. But the recreation program was always popular, and we never had to go out beating the bushes trying to get people to participate in it.
Now, in your experience in the, how should I say this, workman's compensation, that area, is there anything there you'd like to mention?
Well, yeah, workman's compensation. I always had a philosophy on workman's compensation, and that was that we didn't pay people who were legitimately hurt in the plant nearly enough under the state workman's compensation law. Workman's compensation, for those who might not know, there is a state law that requires employers to pay compensation to injured employees. That law also provides that an injured employee has only one redress to his injuries, and that's through workers' compensation, as opposed to civil suit for damages or civil suit for negligence or whatever. So that when an employee is hurt on the job, his only recourse is workers' compensation. The state specifies the amount of benefits and the duration of benefits and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, when you have a program like that, you also have people that see the pot of gold sitting over there, and you get some malingers, you get some people that are faking claims, faking injuries, faking back injuries, faking this and that other thing. And the frustrating part, of course, was to try to separate those from the truly, legitimately hurt employees. And I always said, if you could cut out the people that were looking for the free ride and put their benefits to those people who were legitimately hurt, the program would be much fairer. I doubt that program has changed much. I suspect that they're still fighting the same battles that we did then, and that was to try to hold down the number of people that did not belong on workers' compensation and to adequately take care of those who did. That was always a frustration, and as I say, I suspect that's probably still a problem.
Well, it really then wasn't a problem for you to identify who was a faker and who was...
Well, in some cases it became in some cases it was a problem, but in most cases
pretty obvious, but what could you do about it?
Well, that was the problem. It might be pretty obvious, and you'd go to a hearing before the hearing referees, and they had the idea that here was this poor little individual shop worker against a great big giant corporation who had all the money in the world. We were self-insured, and unfortunately we were the victims of the
That's why you have a good memory on names, and I appreciate your mentioning so
Throwing 'em out.
many, and the positions of responsibility that they covered.
Okay, are we back on again?
But we're back on again.
Okay, well, I started to say that we suffered our licks at the hands of the hearing referees, and that's what would really be frustrating, would be that it would be ordered by a hearing referee from the state of Michigan to pay compensation to someone that I knew, that I, in my heart, knew that he should not be getting it. Very frustrating. I think of an individual, I won't go any farther than to refer to her as Bad News Betty, who moved to a southern state. In fact, my wife and I, on our way out west here just a couple months ago, went through the town that that lady lives in, and I said, I'm going to stop and see Bad News Betty. Never did do it, but you think about things like that. She's one that really got the hooks into us, and that always kind of bothered me.
Well, yes, because anything unfair,
Yeah.
and especially if there were really deserving people.
Mm-hmm. But I had a great group of people working for me when I was in personnel services.
Now, you reported to the director of personnel.
I reported to Sam Donahue, who had gone on to become assistant personnel director, and we were both, he reported to Harold Cutler, who was the personnel director. Harold Cutler retired, oh gosh, I'm not sure I can give you the year, but I'd say about 1975, 76, 77, along in there. And he was replaced by Jim Lewandowski. Jim Lewandowski has since gone on as the vice president for personnel at the new Saturn program.
Nice move.
That was a very nice move for Jim. I'm not sure whether he's moved on to Tennessee yet or not. But yes, I reported to Sam Donahue.
Oh, what kind of a man was Sam to work with?
Oh, Sam was a great guy. Sam was very supportive, and I always got along very well with Sam, and as most people did. Sam was I shouldn't say this probably because I don't know whether Sam will ever hear this or not, but Sam was a salesman. I mean, he could sell refrigerators to Eskimos, and of course a lot of times we had some pretty tough programs to sell to the UAW, and Sam always did a fantastic job of doing that. I can remember back in when we were developing, I shouldn't say when Oldsmobile was developing the Toronado. Of course, you don't announce a new car and come out with it in the next month. The Toronado, as I recall, debuted in 1966, and so there was like several years of work ahead of that. In 1964, the UAW went on strike. It was a national strike, and obviously Oldsmobile employees were also on strike. But we got the union together, not the union, but certain members of the union, and union leadership together, and explained to them the program that we were coming out with, the new front-wheel drive car, the opportunity that would mean for Oldsmobile's employees and your UAW members, if you will, fellas, what a great thing this will be if this car takes off and goes like it should go, and here's what our scheduling dates are. Now the plant's on strike, and we've got some work that ought to be going on, and it can't because of this strike. And during that strike, the chairman of the committee and Sam Donahue and myself were over in the engineering building at night, and the engineering department loaded many components of the Tornado in its early stages onto a semi-truck, and they hauled it out to the proving grounds in Arizona to continue working on the Tornado during a UAW strike. Not many people know that, but I think Sam was major responsibility for selling that program to the union. As I said, he could sell refrigerators to Eskimos. He was and is a great guy. Trying to think who else I might have worked with there in the personnel department. Gosh, there was a name that.
Fred Barrett, you mentioned.
Fred Barrett.
Did you work with him?
I worked with Fred Barrett when I was in labor relations. Yes, and Fred retired. Fred retired probably in 1970, 71, 72. Red Cherry is a name that a lot of the old timers will remember. Red Cherry he at the time was the employment manager, the hourly employment manager. Red was an All-American basketball player at the University of Michigan, and of course he's living in the hotbed of Michigan State people, but he had a guy that he depended on a lot who eventually replaced him, and that was a guy named Orland Bender. A lot of people recognize his name. Gil Retzloff was a premier bowler in his time.
Mr. Mahoney.
Bill Mahoney
you
was.
Worked with him
Yeah,
too.
Bill Mahoney was the
How
personnel
did you
director.
work with?
He was great. I think Sam must have learned an awful lot from Bill Mahoney, because Bill Mahoney was a salesman too. Bill Mahoney, one of his enduring characteristics, as far as I can remember, was he never forgot a name. Bill Mahoney could stand on the steps of the Civic Center when the quarter-century people were assembling and call probably 80% of the people by their first name. Never forgot a name. It was amazing. Bill's memory for people. And he often said that the most important person a thing has is their name, and you ought to spend some time trying to learn it.
Apparently he did.
He sure did. He studied hard. But Bill retired, and I think Bill Mahoney's going to go on forever. For all I know, he's still kicking around. I don't know, but if he is, he must.
He is.
Is he really?
We've interviewed him.
Bill Mahoney must be close to 100 years old.
He's 92.
Yeah. And the last time I saw him, I don't know whether he'd fallen or what, but he was in a walker, and he hadn't changed a bit. He had the same personality that he had when he was working. Quite a guy.
Well, Ed, what other areas did you have experience in while you were with Oldsmobile?
Well, that's primarily it, Helen. I spent all my time in the personnel department. I never did get out of the manufacturing area. I never did move around there. Never did.
Well, now your training was in journalism, you mentioned, as one of your majors. Did you have a chance to use any of that training?
Well, yeah, because a lot of labor relations work is writing statements and contentions of case positions for cases that are going to go to the umpires. That's in UAW, in the General Motors labor relations agreements. There is a provision for a grievance procedure. The first procedure, the first step of it, of course, is to settle it on the plant floor, if you can, between the foreman and the committeeman. Then it goes on up through the ranks. It goes to the second step, which is with the labor relations department. The third step is a hearing with the personnel director and the international union representative, and then the fourth step is referred to as the umpire step, and that's where the corporation representatives and the international union representatives out of Detroit, in fact, take the case and present it before an impartial hearing referee, whose decision is final and binding. Now, in order to go through all those steps, starting at the second step, the parties reduce their positions to writing, and that's where you cite precedent and history. It's a quasi-legal type thing. You cite precedent, you cite umpire decision, you cite previous cases, and you set your position down in writing. And so there was a lot of writing involved in labor relations. In fact, there's some people used to call me a word merchant, as they did the other guys that were in labor relations. I worked with Roger Lee and John Powers and Jim Richards and some of those fellows were in labor relations, and we all had to learn to write contentions.
Well, do you remember any specific cases that went the 5 steps?
Yes, we had a few, and here again, because of Oldsmobile's dealing with the UAW, most of our cases were settled in the plant. We had very, very few cases go to the umpire. You might know we're in a traffic pattern for the for the Tampa International Airport, and every once in a while they go flying over here and kind of wake you up a little bit. But we had very few cases go to the umpire because the best place to settle a case is at the lowest step of the procedure. Who is more qualified to settle a case fairly than the foreman who was involved in an initial decision, right or wrong, and the employee and his committeeman who's out in his own area and out there on the floor? They're the people that know the case. They're the people that know the facts. And they're the people that got to live with whatever decision is made, whether it's made there or whether it's made in Detroit by the impartial umpire. So we always stress that philosophy at Oldsmobile, that the best place to settle a labor relations case is the lowest possible step. We had a few go to the umpire, and those are not fun. They take a lot of work, and they take a lot of time, and they
do you remember any specifically that you?
Oh yeah, we had a couple of promotion cases that went to the umpire. One of them involved in our die design area was a very important umpire case, which I think we lost. Didn't lose very many. Trying to think of some of the others. A couple of discipline cases, but I don't think we had more than 3 or 4 cases go before the umpire while I was involved in labor relations, and that's pretty good.
Pretty effective.
Yes, it was.
Labor relations.
It was very effective, and here again we're proud of that, and they should be.
Well, now on a case like this die design case where you say we lost.
Oldsmobile.
In a way, does that work out well for the person? Do they go back into the position that they thought they belonged in?
What that case involved, Helen, as I can recall, was an individual who was a die designer who thought that he should have been promoted to a die design checker, which means that he checked the work of other designers.
It would be a promotion for him?
It would be a promotion in pay. And his supervisor thought that there were other individuals in the department who were more qualified for that job than he. And
now, did they go by seniority at all?
Seniority was a determining factor when all other qualifications were equal.
I see.
So that's where we got into the argument. Were individual A's qualifications equal or superior to individual B's? In this particular case, the man who appealed the case was not given the promotion in favor of someone who was lesser senior than he as far as his seniority goes. And he said that my qualifications are equal or superior. I have more seniority, therefore I should have the job. Oldsmobile's position was the individual chosen was superior in ability and capacity to the person who didn't get the job, and therefore they should have the job regardless of seniority. And that's the kind of a dispute that got involved in it.
But how would an impartial judge be able to?
Well, that's what you have to do. You have to show background. You have to show experience. The man that was the promoter to that job had come to us after, I believe, he owned his own company, his own design company, and had a vast range of experience as far as supervising people and that kind of thing. We always thought that he was the superior candidate.
But the impartial judge.
As I recall, Helen, I think the impartial judge ruled against us. That was not my case, fortunately. I don't think I ever had one that went to the umpire. Those cases, we were assigned our cases as they came into the second step of the grievance procedure, which was where it was between the Labor Relations Department and the shop committee. We were assigned our cases by our boss, the supervisor of Labor Relations, or the director of Labor Relations, and so that the Labor Relations representative who was assigned the case would follow that case all the way through to its conclusion. I mean, by following it, he would be involved in it. If at the personnel director and the International Union representative level of that case, they had to have some more information or some more digging on it, it was the initial Labor Relations representative's responsibility to go out and get this information and make sure that it's in the record. This is where all this writing would come into. And as that case went on to the umpire step, the initial labor relations representative was pretty closely involved in that too, even though the corporation representatives handled the corporation's case before the umpire. But the labor relations representative would be involved in it very closely.
Did you appear in Detroit?
Yes, I've appeared in several of those cases, but I think more in my capacity as a supervisor than as the labor relations representative. I also got involved in some of the national negotiations for labor agreements down in Detroit. I was involved on a subcommittee of the UAW GM agreement one time. In fact, I worked on the representation problem for the proving grounds at Milford, a corporation committee. This would be a national negotiation. I was involved in the national negotiations for the plant guards union. I was involved in the national negotiations for the die sinkers union, who represent the die sinkers at the forge plant. And I was involved in the negotiations. They were national, but their scope was strictly local for what we call I shouldn't say what we call their official name, and I love this name. I've never forgotten it. Probably never will forget it. The name of the local union was the Lower Michigan Millmen's District Council of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, UAW, or excuse me, AFL-CIO. Now that was a name that was almost bigger than the union. The union only had those members that worked out at the exhibit and display department. That was the carpenter. They call them the Carpenters and Joiners, but the Lower Michigan Millmen's District, et cetera, et cetera. Love that name.
About 15 words in that title.
Took a while to learn it too. I'll tell you, easy to forget. Yeah.
Well, do you recall any disputes involving now say that Carpenters Union?
Can't you repeat that name for me, Hal?
No, I can't.
Well, no, they were pretty good guys. They were a pretty good group of people to work for. They belonged to that union, and but they were. Well, I shouldn't say that, because that indicates the other people weren't. They were a group of people that were represented by a union as employees of Oldsmobile. They were not employees of Oldsmobile because they were in the union. I don't know, does that make any sense? Maybe it doesn't. They were people who belonged to a union, but they were Oldsmobile employees first.
I see.
And that was true of the carpenters and joiners. And that was true of the die sinkers that worked at the forge plant. And to a great extent, that was true of the plant guards. You know, the plant guards, you always figure, well, they're keeping people out of the plant. They're management folks. Well, they are, but they're represented by a union too. But they were represented by a union, but first of all, they were employees. And I think that's where we were fortunate. In many cases, that's really all you need to say.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that distinction until you pointed it out.
There's
Well, no, you were there when Darrell Husby was director.
right. Darrell Husby replaced Homer Purchase. Homer Purchase was the plant protection chief when I first became aware of plant protection. Darrell Husby?
No,
Homer Purchase. Homer Purchase has got, and if you haven't talked with Homer, you might want to. Homer Purchase has probably got the greatest collection of, you remember the little car models that Oldsmobile used to put out, the promotional models?
The 125th scale?
Yep,
Right.
he had them back to the 1950s, and he used to have a whole string of them lined up across the windowsill in his office. I've got quite a few of them.
Be sure you hang on to them because they're collector's items.
I understand that they are.
$50, $60 a car.
Is that right? Well, Homer's got some that would be worth more than that, because he's got some going back into the 1950s. I particularly remember a 1958 88 Oldsmobile model that he has. That's when we used to say that.
That chrome?
Yeah, they said you could get an FHA loan on that because it had aluminum siding, you know.
The chrome monster, and
Yep.
it wasn't a very popular
The Christmas
car.
tree. The Christmas tree. But Homer Purchase has got a whole string of those things. Homer, I got along well with Homer Purchase. I didn't have that much dealing with him at that time. I was supervisor of labor relations, and he had a fellow that was his chief investigator, a guy named Bill Wedge. A lot of people know Bill Wedge. Yeah, a lot of people remember Bill Wedge. Who,
What would a special investigator be doing?
Bill Wedge was responsible for sleuthing out anything that was amiss at Oldsmobile, and he'd get wind of some employee that was stealing from the plant and stealing car parts. You know, let's face it, car parts are everybody has a car, and you know, car parts are very hot items as far as pocket thefts go. And Bill Wedge would sniff out the perpetrators of those things, and very often would get them to sit down and sign confession that they'd been stealing stuff from the plant. Um, so that's what the chief investigator had to do. Bill Wedge had a way about him that inspired the confidence in an individual that they were smarter than he was. You know, this hayseed can't get anything over on me because I'm probably smarter than he is, and boy, he'd lead them right down the primrose path, and the first thing they knew, all he had to do was just say, would you sign here? Used to have all sorts of weird thefts around there, I'll tell you. We had,
Do you remember some
oh
real,
gosh, yeah, I
real
remember
doozies?
one case where they were stealing transmissions on order for the local speedway. You go up this local speedway and talk to the right people and tell them that you needed a 4-speed floor shift and stick shift transmission, or a 5-speed or something like that. They had people in that plant that would haul one of them out and toss them over the fence, and accomplices on the outside to pick them up in a pickup truck. And they broke up that ring. Bill Wedge was involved in that one. Had another fellow one time that Bill Wedge had been on his trail for a long time, and went out to his house one morning to talk to him about the theft of this stuff. And Bill went up on the porch. The guy said to his wife's friend who was over having coffee, "You better go home now. The cops are here to talk to a thief." And he invited him into the living room. He said, "No, just a minute." He went out in the backyard and called to his 3 little boys. And he called those kids, "Come on in here. I want you to sit down and listen. See what happens when they catch a thief." And Bill Wedge started talking with him, and this guy started collecting parts and material stolen from Oldsmobile until he ended up with a great big pile out in the middle of the living room floor. They had to send a pickup truck out to haul it all in. Bill Wedge could tell you some great stories.
Heaven's sakes.
I don't know a figure, and I don't know as I would be proper in even quoting one if I did know what it was, but the amount of material they used to go out of that plant in the pockets and in the lunch pails of people was astronomical. So it's a constant problem. I'm sure it probably still is.
Well, now don't they have to open their bucket sacks?
They did then.
People go through
They
to get
did
the-
then, but my gosh, Alan, you'd be surprised some of the tricks people would do. We had a fellow stealing paintbrushes. Where was he doing it? He was hiding them in his thermos. We had a guy at the forge plant over at plant 3, that went out with a length of chain, and he had it wrapped around his waist under his overcoat. He got caught when he went through the gate, and they asked him to open up his lunch pail. He opened up his lunch pail, and the chain fell out. How'd that get there? We had somebody stealing copper anode bars that they use in the plating process.
What would they use those for?
Oh, they wouldn't. They'd take them over to the local junkyard and sell them for scrap. Copper, copper is very valuable.
Oh, yes.
And they had no use for them. They were copper bars used in the plating process, and they were quite big and quite heavy. And as I recall, what they did with those is they take them out 2 at a time, and they'd tie them together, put one on each side, tie it around their neck, and put their coat on over it, and go out with those things. People are pretty smart. Now, you can check the lunchbox all you want, and but I guess it'd be a real dummy to hide something in the lunchbox. They come up with some pretty clever ways of getting by. Now, those are cases that we'd end up with in labor relations. The only reason I know about those is because at that time, and I'm sure it's probably still that way, there is a rule that is strictly and rigidly enforced, and that is theft is automatic discharge.
I was going to ask you
Did
about
not
that.
tolerate theft, it's discharge. With a clean record and years of service, it's discharge. And that's the only thing probably that's kept the company from going bankrupt from misappropriation. Just a tremendous problem. It was then, and I'm sure it probably is now.
Still exists.
See, I've been retired now almost 6 years, and I suspect that they probably have the same problem with theft now that they had 6 years ago that we had 20 years ago.
Only some different items.
Mm-hmm. And it's,
There.
as I say, as long as you're building cars, spark plugs were a popular item. All sorts of little things, shoulder belts, seat belts, and that kind of thing. We even had, a fellow one time that back in the 1960s, we used to have what they call a dynamic 88 and a Delta 88. Well, one of them had a little less trim and a little less glitter than the Delta 88 or the Super 88. I guess that was it. The Super 88 was the real hot car. The Dynamic 88, I think, was the lower price one, and the difference was in the interior trim. Well, one of the items that they had in the cheaper car was the plastic lock knobs, the little locking knobs, the up and down buttons, that you push down to lock your car. And the guy was stealing chrome locking knobs. You know, it's a Mickey Mouse. And put your job on the line for a set of chrome-plated locking knobs in order to replace your plastic ones. But people do that. You don't think. And I guess probably the theory is that you don't think you're going to get caught at it. We caught an awful lot of them. Some of them really sad. One of them, we had a case of a divorce or a pending divorce, where the fellow's estranged wife called Bill Wedge and said that Joe down in the press plant has been stealing stuff from Oldsmobile, and I got a mirror here that he stole. So Bill Wedge went out and picked up the mirror from her, and he says, I'll talk with Joe. And he got Joe down in the office and says, did you steal this mirror? You didn't steal this mirror, did you, from Oldsmobile? Yeah. Nah, you didn't steal this mirror. When your ex-wife said that we should talk with you because you stole this mirror. You didn't do that. Yeah. Did his best to get him to deny it, but he wouldn't even deny it. So there are some tough cases, but most cases when you fire a thief, I didn't feel too bad about it.
No. So wrong.
Yep. Well, it's the hand that feeds you, you know. I even felt guilty when I'd come home and find a pencil in my pocket. Yes, I'm sure we all have done. Yeah.
Did you participate in, let's see, how shall I say this? Did any labor relations problems ever get right up to the general manager? Or were those all taken care of before anything got
Primarily, we
started?
tried not to involve the general manager. He had the personnel staff as his arm for dealing with the union and for handling labor problems. And in many cases, the union wanted the general manager to come over here and make us a commitment. Well, we said no. The general manager has designated the personnel director
I had heard
to
that,
make those commitments.
The union often would, or
Oh, yeah,
sometimes would want to.
They often would, and certainly our general managers, at least the ones that were there when I was there, were pretty smart individuals, and they were, very intelligent people. They were great managers, but they weren't experienced labor negotiators, and it's pretty easy for an experienced union negotiator to trap an inexperienced management individual into making a commitment. Like, you don't think anything about, well, can you give the guys in the press plant gloves? Sure, we can do that. Well, Lordy, when you do something like that, you have to put some limitations on it. I mean, does everybody in the press plant get gloves? What about the guy that doesn't need gloves? We always issued gloves for people who have worked on jobs where they get their hands cut or torn or something, not when they got them dirty. That's part of working in the factory, is getting your hands dirty. We issued protective clothing, protective gloves, coveralls, and that kind of thing to protect people, not to keep them clean. So that, it would be easy to trap somebody who is inexperienced in a negotiating area into making a commitment that shouldn't be made. That wasn't primarily the reason for not involving the general managers. Personnel directors that I knew of always kept the general manager informed, involved, and got permission to do things in negotiations. The general managers were involved, yes, in the negotiations with the union, but they were involved with the personnel director and with the labor relations director so that they knew where we were going, what we were going to agree to do, and they agreed, that this is what should be done. But as far as sitting down and meeting face to face with the union in a negotiating atmosphere, they didn't do it.
Well, after all, the director of personnel was
that was his responsibility, and he had the authority to do that. If you started involving the general manager in those type of things, then why should we take the word of the personnel director? From speaking from the union side, why should we take the word of the personnel director when we can get the general manager? So, we're not going to talk to you. Bring in the boss, and that defeats the whole purpose of it. He had other things to do, just the same as he didn't go over and design cars, but he had a staff that did.
Well, Ed, when did the policy or procedure begin of no cameras in the plant? Was that in fact?
Oh, Helen, that was there. I'm pretty sure that was there when I came. I suspect that probably came in during World War II.
I was wondering if it may not have.
They used to have to wear ID badges with pictures on it, I think. And I suspect that the no cameras in the plant probably was a government edict.
Perhaps so.
We were working. Excuse me, this was before I got there, but Oldsmobile was involved in making shells, gun shells, and a lot of defense work. And the government had, as I understand it, had inspectors on the spot, and I'm sure that's probably where no pictures.
Now, were you familiar with this underground firing range where they fired some of the guns?
No, I wasn't. I never did see that. I think that was over where the paint plant is now, or I shouldn't say is now. I'm not sure what's there now. Used to be. I think it was Building 37, which was the rocket shell plant. I think at the time, or at least one of the primary defense. But that was before my time. I wasn't there when that started.
And you retired in July of...
I retired in March of 1983.
1983.
It's hard to imagine. It's been almost 6 years. As they say, time flies when you're having fun. I don't know how I had time to work.
And how many years were you there?
I was there just a little over 30 years. I started in February of 53 and retired in March of 83.
And then, now, did you take one of the early
Mm-hmm.
retirement offers?
Yes, I did. Yep. And actually, I was ready. I was ready a year before. I didn't go until I was 56. I was ready at 55, but it didn't work out that way. And finally, it was finally made available to me, and so I took it. Since then, quite a few of the people that I've worked with have retired. Sam Donahue is retired now. Roger Lee's retired. Jim Riches is retired. Reuben Bessinen, who was our workers' comp administrator, he's retired. In fact, he's living down at Fort Myers. Just about. I suspect if I went back to the main offices now, or the personnel offices now, I probably wouldn't know half the people because of the changes that they've made, and of course the combining of the Fisher Body crews and the Oldsmobile crews into Buick Olds Cadillac. It's still Oldsmobile Division, General Motors to me. That's how I address my letters or any communications. That's how I address it.
It is to a lot of other people.
I'm sure it is. But it's still Oldsmobile. They ask where I retired. It's not BOC. It's Oldsmobile.
Well, Lansing will always be an Oldsmobile town.
It will. And living down here in Florida like I do, it's surprising the number of people that you mentioned Lansing, Michigan. They know that's where Oldsmobiles come from.
Sure.
So Lansing and Oldsmobile are kind of synonymous. You don't mention Buicks.
Well, no. No reason.
Well, one other thing I was going to mention, that working in the personnel department had a lot of advantages because, first of all, you work for some great people, but one of the disadvantages, I guess, or that's an advantage too. One of the plus or minus advantages of working in the personnel department was we always had to work at the parties that Oldsmobile sponsored for its employees. We used to have the Christmas party for salaried employees. We used to have the I was saying that one of the things that we had to do as part of the personnel team, if you will, was to work at the parties, on the seating committees, and to make sure that things went as they were planned to go and scheduled to go. And the personnel department had to plan these parties. It's no small task planning and organizing and conducting and ushering and one thing or another a party for 2,000 people. We used to go out to that Civic Center, and of course we had that place packed right to the rafters, and we used the side rooms and everything else. But my whole goal from the time I went in the personnel department in 1953 until the time I retired in 1983 was someday I was going to go to a quarter-century club party, and to a salaried employees picnic, and to a Christmas party as a guest, where I didn't have to work on the committee. And you know what happened? A year or two before I retired, they discontinued the quarter-century parties because it got so big you couldn't handle it anymore. They discontinued the salaried Christmas parties because it got so big there wasn't any place in Lansing that we could have it. And I went to one salaried employees picnic out at the Ionia Fairgrounds after I retired as a guest. So I finally accomplished my career ambition. I went to one party as a guest. That was
And
just
now
going
they've
on.
cut that out.
And now they've cut that out. Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. That was what I always wanted to do, was to be able to just go in there and gripe about the food and gripe about the seating and gripe about how crowded it was and sit there and do nothing but grouse and enjoy myself. Never got to do that. Well,
Yeah. Well, didn't the people seem pleased when we were giving the prizes away?
oh yeah.
The parties?
And more important than the prizes, Helen, was the opportunity to get together. And probably 3 or 4 years before I retired, I guess it was longer than that. It was when Harold Cutler was still there. We got to the point where the Christmas party for the salaried men and the retirees who were all invited got to be about 27 or 2,800 people, and we could only pack about 2,040 some people into the Civic Center by the rules of size, the space available, and also by the rules of the fire marshal. And so, rather than discontinue the party at that time, the decision was made that we wouldn't invite the retirees. And oh my goodness, was there gnashing of teeth. They didn't care about the prizes. They didn't even care about the dinner. This is a chance to get together to see people that you used to work with, and so that you mentioned it was fun to win the prizes. And incidentally, in all those years, I only won twice. Never missed a Christmas party. I only won twice. My first one that I went to, I won a 14-pound slab of bacon, and I think one of the last ones I went to, I won an electric grill. I already had 2 of them. But when they discontinued that party, I know that the general manager, Bob Cook, at the time, got a lot of letters commenting on it. Some of it words on hate mail, and but that meant a lot to people to get together, and that was the advantage of those Christmas parties and the 4th century parties and everything.
There really wasn't any other way they could have done it, though.
We checked with every place we could think of. I'm trying to think of the name of the convention center out there on South Cedar Street.
The Clarion?
Yeah.
Long's?
It was Long's, right. The Clarion. They could only seat about 1,200 in there. The Civic Center in Lansing, the old Civic Center, would seat about 2,000. We would check with Michigan State and maybe about using the field house out there, and you wouldn't let us do that. State facilities, they couldn't rent it out for private parties, stuff like that. I always hated the Ionia Fairgrounds, where we had our picnics, because of first of all, the distance, 45 miles from Lansing, the ramshackle and tumble down, but they were only about the only place around that area that was large enough to hold the numbers we had for that. And it's a shame that they cut those out, because I think they were good. I think they were good for morale. They were good for people. They were good to get together and to play together. I mentioned a while back that the recreation activity, where you got the hourly people and the salaried people to play together, was very valuable. And I think you lose a lot when you discontinue something like that.
We started discontinuing the sports activities when there was a money crunch, or sales were down.
Yes.
Was that the reason
I
behind
think
it?
I think one of the first things that we pulled back on a little bit was the softball program.
When was that, Ed?
Oh gosh. See, I have to measure everything back from 83 or forward from 53. There's a long gap in there. That was probably in the late 1970s. Excuse me. It got going again because I guess the people wouldn't let it die. Even though we used to have a couple of ball diamonds over at the back end of Plant 3, over on Willow Street. I don't know whether they're still there or not, but that's where a lot of our games were played, over on those ball diamonds. And even after we officially didn't sponsor the program one year, darn if the people didn't go over there and use the ball diamonds on their own. So it's a popular program. I'm sorry to hear that they've discontinued all of that stuff.
They do have a bowling league now, well, at least for the girls, but it's a GM Women's Club, and the girls do that themselves. It's not a company-sponsored thing.
They don't even have the Oldsmobile bowling leagues anymore, then, is that right? That happened after I left.
Yes, only through the club
Yeah.
itself. Now, I don't know about the men.
Well, one of the premier bowlers at Oldsmobile in later years, after Gail Retzloff, I think, won the state singles bowling championship one year with Bob Fox, who was the labor relations clerk over at the Forge plant. Fox won the state championship one year in Saginaw. But Dick Fletcher, who used to be in sales promotion
Oh,
or
yes,
advertising.
advertising.
Okay, Dick Fletcher was one of the big moguls in the Lansing Bowlers Association. In fact, I think he was secretary or the treasurer when we left Lansing, which is it's not connected with Oldsmobile, but he would be the secretary for the Lansing Bowling Association, and I suspect that there are probably several thousands of bowlers in Lansing. So
Well, I would too.
Dick's got quite a responsible job, or had quite a responsible job with them through his, affinity to bowling. Dick, I believe, is still in Lansing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is.
Hazlitt, I think he lived out of Hazlitt. Dick kind of used to play golf league with Dick Fletcher. Dick was a golfing partner of mine.
I see Fred Barrett is gone.
Fred died. Gail Ritzloff died. Ray Brown died here a few years
Cherry.
ago. Fred Cherry. Gosh, we Harold Cutler. Harold Cutler died.
Yeah, a lot of the people you worked with.
Yep. I was gonna, no, I won't tell that story.